we are really grateful to have those of you who are catching this live and those many of you who watch this recording. We know there's usually a couple hundred of you who catch it later, and we appreciate you setting aside prioritized time to check this out in the time that you have available. We know many of you are very busy professionals, and we know that this is an interesting and important topic that we'll be covering today. And so we're grateful because so many of your work touches along the issues around economic mobility, whether or not that's your direct work, right? I mean, if you're hiring people, if you're helping people have stability, those types of things. But today we're going to focus more specifically on that economic mobility fashion. And so what is economic mobility, right? It's not just stability, right? You hear terms like financial stability or financial wellness, and these different terms are largely interchangeable. But economic mobility is the ability for someone, an individual, to have their own agency in moving up or down the financial ladder to find the place that they may want to land. So the ability to, and I say down, right? Sometimes we think it's only upwards, but someone may say, you know what? I want to spend more time with my family. And so I need to know how much money I can make. It'll be less than I'm making now, but I'm going to have more time. But I'm going to be able to make those decisions. The decisions aren't made for me. And so my life is ended up being determined based upon my own personal decisions. And how do I get into a place that I can make those financial decisions to be where myself and my family and my community want or need me to be. So I'm really grateful today for the variety of individuals we have. I am Kevin Ressler. I am the president and CEO of United Way of Lancaster County, and I have been grateful to have this opportunity to bring this concept with my team. As always, a thank you to Joel and to Olivia in particular for their support. You won't see them on screen today, but they are behind the scenes, and without them, this doesn't work. I'm going to invite my fellow panelists here today to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with my direct work colleague here, Kim Maldonado.
Hi, my name is Kim Maldonado, and I am the director of VITA with the United Way of Lancaster County. I've been here since August of 2022. Prior to that, I was a program director at Wellspan Philhaven for peer support, where we worked with individuals who have a history of mental illness and helping them in a variety of different ways.
Thank you, Kim. And Tyrone.
Yes, I'm Tyrone Miller, the CEO of Lancaster Works, which is Lancaster County's first and only social enterprise B Corp workforce development agency.
Thank you. Angel.
Hi, my name is Angel Rosario, and I'm a director of community lending for Community First Fund.
And Randy.
Hi, I'm Randy Schober. I represent Tenfold. I've been the director of the Financial Empowerment Center for a little under a year, but prior to that, I have a 21 plus year career here at what was Tabor and now Tenfold, working with individuals to try to economically empower themselves to move up and down the financial ladder that we'll be talking about.
Thank you, Randy. And we'll go to Jamie. The rest of us are going to drop off. Jamie's going to do our presentation this morning. So thank you so much, Jamie, for willing to put this together. And without further ado, I'm kicking it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you to the United Way for hosting this conversation today on economic mobility. It's a discussion definitely worth having and personally near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure near and dear to the hearts of everyone that's watching here today. I'm going to pop up my presentation here for everyone to get going. So as Kevin mentioned, my name is Jamie Arroyo. I am the CEO of Assets. We're a nonprofit organization here in Lancaster County and a community development financial institution that works with women and BIPOC entrepreneurs to start and grow their businesses. We were actually started back in 1993 by the Mennonite Economic Development Associates, also known as MEDA, really as a way of alleviating poverty through entrepreneurship. We believe that we can build an economic or an ethical and equitable economy where everyone can prosper. So throughout my conversation today, I will be focusing on economic development through the lens of equity as well as entrepreneurship, given that that's really the lane that assets plays in. We do that in quite a few ways. Our main service lines that we offer at Assets to provide economic mobility really focuses around entrepreneur training. That's inclusive programming that allows entrepreneurs to receive the resources they need to develop business blueprints, as I like to call them, or business plans in a more traditional sense, really do some deep dives around topics such as financing and marketing, but really the idea of getting in a cohort style classroom to really learn about how do I develop the plan to start and grow my business. We also do that through community lending, which is creating equitable access to capital. So as a CDFI, we're really focused on making sure individuals that can't access traditional capital, such as loans at your local bank or credit union, and that could be for a variety of reasons, whether it's a low credit score, maybe the business is just too new that the bank isn't willing to take the risk, but they need a few $1,000s to buy a piece of equipment, to get supplies, working capital, or inventory. We're able to help entrepreneurs get access to that capital. The unique part of this is that we also pair it with education and technical assistance, whether that's credit counseling or financial coaching. We really work hand in hand with our entrepreneurs to make sure that they are receiving the education needed to build the tools they need to actually or eventually receive access to traditional capital, such as mortgages or lines of credit that will help their business flourish. And then finally, we also offer impact consulting. So we understand that in order to build that ethical and equitable economy, we can't just have business as usual. We have to understand that businesses that are established and are being profitable need to think beyond the profit line. They need to think about how are they treating the people in their community and how are they treating the planet that they're drawing resources from. So we help businesses measure and improve their social and environmental performance to make sure that they're also focusing on the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. So when we think about economic mobility, the definition or the standard definition really refers to people's ability to improve their economic status over time. But there are two different types of economic mobility. We could think of absolute mobility and relative mobility. So absolute mobility really focuses on, think about up or down. So over a course of time, we can steadily get pay increases, we can steadily build wealth, all factors remaining the same, and I am able to produce more wealth or have a higher net worth over time. Relative mobility focuses on other factors that, while someone might start to increase their status or maybe start to build wealth or savings over time, they are actually staying almost in the same place because of other factors holding them back. A good example of that could be a first generation person receiving higher education. With that higher education, they're able to receive a higher paying job, but maybe they're saddled with student loan debt that is not allowing them to fully prosper with that higher income, which keeps them in place. That's an example of relative mobility compared to someone who doesn't have student loan debt that maybe is able to take advantage of that higher income, purchase a home, et cetera, and build their wealth over time. Some factors that influence economic mobility that we'll discuss more today in the panel really center around education, savings, and also neighborhood poverty can influence economic mobility. So the environment that someone is in, down to their zip code, has a direct impact on whether or not they are able to achieve higher economic mobility. So when we discuss economic mobility, I like to think of it as achieving the American dream. And for a long time, we've talked about different ways of achieving that American dream or achieving economic mobility. They have been typically talked about in higher education. So going to college, getting a high paying job. It's also been talked about in the sense of home ownership, buying a home, building equity as really the #1 asset for Americans to build wealth. However, there's a third way that we have seen at Assets as a trend starting to pop up as a new way of achieving that American dream or economic mobility, and that's entrepreneurship. More and more people, whether they are in the workforce or not, are starting to think about, how do I start my own business to actually close the wealth gap, to achieve a higher income, or even have supplemental income on the side to help support some of my expenses. So when we help people here at Assets, we really think of entrepreneurship as that third pillar to achieving economic mobility, or the American dream, as it's as we talk about. A few barriers that we have seen here at Assets to achieving economic mobility really has a similar thread across some of those first two, whether it's education, home ownership, or even starting your own business through entrepreneurship. These barriers seem to be common threads that we're finding here at Assets. The number one barrier is lack of affordability that we're seeing here in Lancaster County. So as we all know, there has been rising prices across real estate, rent, whether it's rent or purchasing property. Prices have increased throughout the entire county. So the lack of affordability is starting to become a barrier for entrepreneurs to either start their business and find space, or even purchase their own property to make sure that they can stay there for the long term. The second barrier that we've been seeing, which is one of the main focus points of our community lending, is credit as an access point. So credit is still a gateway to receiving financing for businesses. And it's also the gateway for home ownership and education, whether to get student loans. So credit is still one of the things that we are seeing as a main barrier to achieving economic mobility. And then third, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, is patient capital. So financing is great. Being able to get a loan or a line of credit is great. But something that entrepreneurs also need access to is patient capital, whether that's from friends or family, or even equity investment. Capital that's going to allow for more flexible terms. So that way entrepreneurs can focus on the actual building of the business and don't feel the restrictions of having to pay back this debt immediately. So that's where equitable access to capital comes into play. There are plenty of banks, credit unions. Lancaster's lucky to have a few CDFIs, such as Community First Fund and Assets here in our community. But we also need equitable access, new innovative tools to provide financing or other equity investments for entrepreneurs. So I'll wrap up with a few action items that we can discuss during the panel. Equitable access to capital is definitely one. So whether that's through CDFIs like Community First Fund and Assets, but also pairing that with technical assistance. How are we preparing people and families to achieve the next step in accessing capital? Trusted and welcoming resource providers. So understanding that resource providers need to provide welcoming and safe environments for everyone in Lancaster County. So that way people can get connected to resources. Organization or cohort here in Lancaster, Reinventing Our Communities cohort, made up of resource providers that help entrepreneurs, are doing just that by making sure that resource providers are thinking about how are they building trust with community members, through providing welcoming spaces and outreach and community presence. And then finally, advocacy. We understand that the rules also have to change to make sure that our economy is equitable. That could be from credit reporting standards, so ensuring that rental payments, utility payments count towards building credit and not just hurting credit. Zoning practices across all municipalities to allow for more building of affordable units, a raise in our minimum wage, and an action on student loan debt, just to name a few, around where resource providers can provide advocacy to make sure that everyone has access to economic mobility. And then finally, I'll end with how does Lancaster County build a human-centered economy? In order to truly achieve for everyone to achieve economic mobility, we need to think of our economy as serving people and not the other way around. So here at Assets, we are having conversations around what does a human-centered economy look like to ensure the economy is just a vehicle that we're using to achieve economic prosperity, but we're here to serve people, and it shouldn't be the other way around. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. So welcome back our panelists. We'll have a nice conversation. And for those of you who haven't been to a community conversation that we hosted before, just a reminder that we will talk about issues that Jamie just presented, but not just the issues that Jamie just presented. So different folks here with different experiences. We had them talk about that in their introductions before. One thing I want to just set us off with a little bit is thinking about this from a historical perspective. Also, if you hear background noise, sorry, they are tearing up my entire street. UGI is doing their whatever thing. So my house is literally shaking like an earthquake. So hopefully it's not too distracting. But anyway, when we think about these things, I want us to just think about history, right? So we think about economic mobility is related to income and those things. A lot of these tools and frameworks that we are operating on are less than certainly 100 years old, in many cases less than 75 years old, and in some cases really about 30 years old. And so let me walk you through a couple of those, for instance. So when we think about the poverty rate, right, here at United Way, we talk about ALICE, the Assets Limited Income Constrained Employed Rate, because that's higher than the poverty rate. The poverty rate was established in the 1950s, in the late 50s, early 60s by a woman named Molly Orshansky, who was looking at how much money people spent on average on food as a proportion of their total income, and came to this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rating. Well, the various things that you have to spend on today, and not just the cost of those items, but the things you have to spend on to survive in the modern economy are different. For instance, an internet bill. That's not anything that was part of your composition of financial necessities in the 1950s or 60s. A cell phone bill or multiple cell phone bills, depending on your household makeup. These are the types of things that our governmental structures have not caught up for rating the poverty rate. And so our poverty rate doesn't encompass people who are struggling. And the people we're talking about today are more than just those who make approximately $12,500 a year for full-time work. That's what the poverty rate is. If you're being paid minimum wage, you work full-time, you actually make $15,800. So at $725, you're not actually considered $725 an hour. You're not actually considered in poverty by the government standards. And so what we're talking about is a wider swath of people than if you just look at the roughly 12, 13% of people living in poverty today. When you fast forward to that, you think about, Jamie talked about credit scores, and I want to start this conversation around credit scores. Credit scoring, credit reporting itself starts in about 100 years ago or so, but credit scores start a little bit later. With the advent of computations and computers in the 1950s, there was the first sort of sense of a credit score. But it wasn't until 1989 that FICO scores became the dominant use of scoring. And it wasn't until 1995 that Freddie Mac required all governmental loans to use the FICO credit score in order to predetermine who was able to actually get a loan. So when we think about these things, these dominant elements of our life, like FICO credit scores, which determine, as Jamie said, whether you can get loans to go to college, whether you can get an apartment, whether you can buy a house, whether you can get a car, all of these various things, right? Whether you can get insurance, all these things are impacted, the rates and other things, by something that essentially wasn't created until 1989. And so we need to be mindful that these are not sort of tabulates that were given down by God, and this is how the world has to be. These were decisions that people in the last 30 years made in positions of influence and power in government that have determined how all of us live. And those same decisions can be changed, modified, or adjusted. And so with that being said, I want to jump to you, Angel, first, and thinking about what does credit scoring look like or not look like in your world?
Hey, Kevin, thanks. Yeah, so one of the things that I love about working for a community development financial institution, or CDFI, is that we have the flexibility to actually get the full story of somebody's credit score. Kevin, as you've mentioned, racism has been built in credit scores inherently throughout the years, and it's still prevalent. And a lot of times, larger banks, since they work on algorithms and they try to work on efficiency, they're just looking at a score, and if the score doesn't come in line, they kick the loan out and not really understand what happened. Did that person have a sick child? Did they have a lot of medical bills? Did something happen while they were in school and they had to drop out of school, which is why these school bills are there and why they may be late? So we really take the time to just really understand every trade line, every line item on the credit report, so that we can explain that story to our decision makers who are approving loans, and again, give them access to capital. I think it's an injustice to just look at a score and make a character assessment of that individual, because there's so much more to a person, especially when they're trying, again, to work on economic upward mobility.
Yeah, so a long time ago, I worked at Community First Fund as a America Vista and underwrote loans. And one of the things that I learned about that I didn't know was that institutions don't have to report stuff to credit. And sometimes, it would be harmful for them. So when you're working with these marginalized, challenged populations, if you just automatically say, we're going to report everything, well, they fell behind, but you understood they fell behind because this thing happened, right? And so you report that whole bill being, that giant business loan they have of $200,000, $300,000, you report that whole thing. It just wrecks them in their personal life as well. So when we think about credit scores, I think for most of us, we think about big purchases, right? I don't need to give my credit score to my grocer to buy my groceries. Well, unless I'm paying with a credit card, which I needed to get a credit card and a credit score, but there's the common purchases. We're thinking about larger purchases. So Randy, help us understand, how does this sort of world of credit play into the ability to access housing, affordable housing, and or any housing at all? But what is the credit sort of process, access to credit? What does that play into the tenfold world, thinking about housing and the economic mobility elements that supports? And you're muted there, so just all good.
So here at Tenfold, we like to look at things from a continuum of care model. So when we're looking at access to housing, for example, we could be working with someone who is currently unsheltered, all the way up to somebody who already owns their home but maybe experience some kind of financial difficulty that might make that housing unstable. And so whether you're looking at access or changing their financial pathway to make sure that they can stay in their home, credit is one of the first things that we have to assess for them to determine where they can fit in that continuum of care, be it good, better, or indifferent. Unfortunately, that is sort of to Kevin's point, it's the access point. Jamie's, I believe Jamie talked about that in his presentation, whether it's access or continued mobility, the credit score and the credit report play a huge role in that. When somebody comes to Tenfold, and we do pull their credit report, we do our best to try to just break it down as simply as possible. What are the things that we have influence over, and what are the things that we don't have influence over? And then just do our best to try to limit whatever barriers that they have, so that if we can get that credit to improve or change or grow to a certain point to provide them access, it is absolutely crucial in changing their ability to move upwards or downwards.
Thank you. So Tyrone, right? So if we think about a credit score, starting there, credit score, if you look at it as a pie chart, there's certain percentages of credit score that impact at a different level, right? So payment history is like 35%, and then debt burden is the second one at 30%. Both of those, whether you're able to make your bills and you can pay them, or whether you need to take on more debt to pay those bills, however that works, right? The key to keeping those as low and manageable as possible is your income, right? So what do you have coming in so that you can push out towards those expenditures? Of course, in the United States, for the most part, the only way you get income is through work, at least any meaningful, substantial level of income to advance yourself. Tyrone, can you talk to us about what are the barriers that, individuals, or what do you see in that workforce development, helping people get jobs? How does this kind of sort of structure of challenges play into what makes people think about work, whether that's work that they want to do versus have to do, and how does this sort of challenge play in for workforce development and finding gainful employment?
Well, when you think of workforce development, there are really two essential elements to workforce development. And that's, access to the resources that are required to help an individual develop fully and to identify that skill set, that talent base that they have. And then also put that individual into an environment that's welcoming and supportive to help that individual really grow and thrive. As we work with individuals here at Lancaster Works, you mentioned, the housing issue with Randy just mentioned. I got to tell you, I'm really excited. Right now, upcoming HDC Mid-Atlantic newsletter, we just worked with an individual who was on the verge of eviction, and he had lost his job due to illness. This impacted him tremendously, and he was in subsidized housing already. He's one of the Alice population. He is an individual who we, on Monday, before he had his eviction notice meeting on Wednesday, we got him a job paying $30 an hour. He's able to establish a repayment plan. We saved his housing, and now this individual is ready to go on and thrive. He's very excited for the future. So now, as we look at working with individuals, workforce development is truly a key. But again, access to those resources and that positive environment are the key to an individual's success.
Thanks. So, all right. So you get a job, you have some level of regular expectation around income. It's still not quite necessarily enough. Kim, I want to bring you in, right? Because you're a key component of this here. So you use the acronym, you're director of VITA. Can you actually spell that out? What does that mean? And what do you see when it comes to some of these families who are at the low to moderate income level, struggling to make ends meet? And how does your program complement this?
Yeah. So VITA stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. And what our mission is to provide year-long free tax preparation along with financial education. And so the majority of our work is during the traditional tax season from the end of January through middle of April. But this year we have been providing services every Tuesday and Thursday for individuals who maybe did not get their taxes done, who have back taxes to take care of, maybe they need things amended. So we provide those services. And I think one of the biggest things at VITA that we do is we offer hope and we offer a safe place for folks to come in. As you mentioned, all these folks who have credit card debt and, want to find a place to live, want to continue living where they're at. I mean, I've heard many times people after they finish their appointment, it's, oh, now I have money for rent for next month, or now I have a down payment for my apartment that I want to move into. So we're providing those opportunities for people to, get their money back. A lot of people, when they come in, they think, oh, this is money that we're getting from the government and I should be getting all this money. Well, they're getting their money back. And hopefully what we want to be able to do is to educate folks so that when they're setting up, when they're getting a job, and how to properly set up a W-4, so that they're getting all their funds. I mean, it's amazing. We did about 8,800 returns, and we had about 5,400 who received a refund, anywhere between $1, and our highest amount was $17,000. We had 23 people who received over $10,000 in returns. So that is a significant amount of money for someone who has credit card debts that we were just talking about, to be able to pay off that balance, to be able to get what they need for their kids, to be able to use this a significant amount of money to help with just their basic needs.
Thank you. So, Jamie, I want to hop back to you. Sort of the local economic trends, moving away from credit, so broader sort of to economic situations. You know, Lancaster City's talked about the challenge of poverty rate over the last number of years, pretty with more attention. And, you know, we look at these numbers, and at one point it was 30% of people living in poverty, right? You know, I remember at one point there was a report that the poverty rate had dropped by 1%, but in a city of 60,000, that's 600 people. Like, I live in I'm one street away from the poorest census tract in this county. My kids go to the public elementary school in the poorest census tract in this county. My neighbors are the folks who we've been talking about. Well, actually, many of my neighbors were the folks. And now my neighbors are people who live in houses that have gone from $50,000 houses to $160,000 houses in the blink of an eye. And so my former neighbors, some still live in the city, but many live in other places. And so when the poverty rate drops, if gentrification is happening, doesn't necessarily mean that we've helped the individual who lived in poverty if we've helped the neighborhood increase its average rate, right? So what do we see here, both city and Lancaster County? You know, we always tend to have better unemployment rates than the state, you know, the numbers, but then when you start to dig details, you say, man, but there's people suffering, there's people struggling. What are the unique challenges that are happening right now in Lancaster around economic mobility, economic strength in this community?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And, you know, I'll go back to, in my presentation, I talked about absolute mobility versus relative mobility, and just understanding that those can't be talked about in isolation. So it's always a both and. So when I think about economic mobility, and we could use, Lancaster is very interesting because you could look at the city and county as an example of like the difference around economic mobility, as folks either are unfortunately pushed out of the city because of affordability in certain areas, or decide to move out the city because of economic mobility the other way. They're able to afford more homes, they're able to, or a bigger home, or they want, you know, whatever it might be. So, it happens in both ways. I think one of the realizations that we try to take the approach of, and I have a unique position because not only am I at Assets, but I also sit on city council. So I kind of have these different perspectives that I kind of bring together. But I think the understanding is that it's complex, and that you can't take things in isolation. So not only do we need to, yes, continue investment so we can provide a welcoming environment and a great environment for economic mobility, but how do we allow folks that have been here for decades to participate in that wealth creation that's happening? So for example, you mentioned housing prices that have increased. Some folks don't benefit from that if they are renters, for example, and are pushed out because prices increase. However, there have been others who have benefited greatly from that if they were homeowners that were able to build wealth, which is what we want. Is we want folks to build equity in their home as their number one asset. So there's other factors such as going back to credit, going back to high paying jobs, going back to these other factors that we need to make sure that we're also including that in the conversation, in order to make sure that everyone is able to benefit from what's happening, and we can't take that in isolation.
Yeah, thanks. So one of my neighbors lived here for 13 years on the street, and 4 different building owners. Every one of them asked if she could do some kind of rent to own, and her income was lower. First, she did just sort of day labor jobs. Then she got her LPN. Then she eventually was working on her RN, and her money kept increasing, but it didn't increase to the pace of what they demanded, right? And so they would sell to another person. No one would improve the quality of the house, but the cost would improve because of the macroeconomics. Randy, you know I told her about Tenfold because it's a block and a half from here. When it was Tabor, this is years ago, probably 8 years ago. Someone shows up like that, right? They're trying. What's a product, or what is it that you're going to help them? Just sort of walk us through. What are you going to tell this woman, Jane Doe? What are you going to tell her as ways of trying to be able to get that to be her property so she can benefit, like Jamie said, when the equity grows?
Right. So we're going to, try to assess where she is, first of all. That's always the key. Try to figure out realistically, what are each of those monthly expenses? What are each of those, what are the assets that you currently have access to? And then we'll try to determine what kind of resources might be out there. Is it the match savings for tomorrow? Does she qualify income wise to try to help build a pool of funds together so that when she would apply for that mortgage, she has that a little bit of the savings in place so that she can move forward along with possibly our down payment assistance program.
Can you mention what is that match savings? Help, I mean, I know, but help us understand, what is that match savings? What kind of program is that that's available to people?
So Match Savings for Tomorrow is a program that just basically the only requirement that we have is that well, you have to be income qualified, but we asked you to start a savings regimen. It could be as low as $25 a month, or you could try to save $1,000 in 6 months. Either way we want to go. Our program lasts anywhere from a minimum of 6 months, a maximum of 3 years. And the goal is to continue a savings habit. And by continuing that savings habit, you build up funds in your savings account up to $1,000, and then we can match that $1,000 dollar for dollar up to $2,000, and you would have $3,000 to put towards an asset. The qualifying assets would be home ownership, business startup, transportation, or education. So a lot of those are part of the conversation today, the economic mobility, because if you can obtain that asset, whether it be education or home ownership, that can help move you upwards on that mobility spectrum that we're talking about.
Great,
So
thanks.
how do we get you access to it?
That's great. So this same person, Jane Doe, we'll call her. I shouldn't call her Jane Doe because she's actually Latina, but so that's a different name. But so she, Tyrone, I want to hop to you because she worked for a local health facility that would pay for her RN, but she had to agree to work there for an additional 5 years afterwards. And because of the way the scheduling worked and because of where she had to go with that, it would take her 5 years to actually get that. So 10 years to get the RN. But for her, this was a reasonable deal. She was going to get the education and it was going to be paid for, and that would increase her wage, not realizing that over 10 years, where she was hoping to be in 10 years, may not be as achievable. So Tyrone, someone like this comes to you. They would like to get to a place where they're going to be able to own the home that they've been living in for 10, 12 years that they can't buy because they don't have enough. How are you going to, someone comes to you, how are you going to help them? Like, what options can you put in front of them to accelerate their income opportunities through workforce development?
Well, what we do with individuals is we sit with them to really identify their true skill set and try to work with them to advance their training, to get additional education and skill training. But as a part of that, I've gone a step further myself and become a registered apprenticeship navigator, because I found that registered apprenticeships are really a tremendous resource for individuals to help them advance their skills, to earn while they learn, so that they can continue to move forward and get those credentials without incurring a tremendous amount of debt that happens with a college degree. One of the things that I talked about for many years are options other than a 4-year degree, because there are, as we know, many individuals that are excelling in the economy without a degree. And these individuals that are going through these processes are really, really being able to thrive and build the wealth that they need to move their families to the next economic step in the ladder.
Thanks. So yeah, it's helpful to understand that the pathways that we paint broadly may not be the only pathways for you. And so it's making sure that people are aware of non-traditional paths, which only 30% of Americans go to college. So it's always interesting, right? Because we present this as if it's the main and only path, even though only a third of Americans end up going through it, and then not even all of them graduate. So you end up having this path that's talked about as the traditional path, which is significantly in the minority as far as what people end up doing. So how do we think about making sure those resources are available? So some people are popping questions in here, and I'm going to work those in as we talk. Someone asked about when is time for Q&A. Anytime you've got a question or a comment, please use chat for comment, Q&A for questions. If you get one of them wrong, it's fine. We'll clean it up. But want to start here. Jamie, maybe you know this one. I know an old number. I'm not sure if it's still the standard number, but how many generations does it take for someone in relative mobility to get to absolute mobility?
I might kick that back to you. I looked at that question. I'm not quite exactly sure the number of generations that it takes.
So historically, the what we would use, I should also mention that part of my credentials here is not just United Way CEO. I'm also board chair for Everins Federal Credit Union. I previously worked at Community First Fund. I was vice chair of assets board at one point. So I have some other economic development space here, but the number that we historically used in poverty alleviation was that it took 3 generations to get out of and stay out of poverty, right? So when we think about that last part's the important part, and stay out of. Many people throughout their own individual lives will bounce in and out of poverty. Right? All of a sudden they get a good job and it works out well, and then their car breaks down and they get sick and they have medical debt and they've got to take care of someone, and all of a sudden they don't have enough vacation days and they lose that job that was economically moving them out of poverty. Last couple of years during COVID, we had a lot of people bouncing in and out of poverty. And one of those, 40% of American children were taken out of poverty and moved above the poverty threshold because of the child tax credit. One single piece of legislation, 40% of the children in poverty, boop, gone. And then credit runs out, boop, back into it. Right. So the bouncing in and out. But to move and to stay, that's different. The move and to stay is usually 3 generations. In some ways, we can cut it down to 2. But for the most part, it's usually about 3 generations, because you have things like equity that take time to build. So it's not an instantaneous thing. This is why it's so important to understand our history as well, right? So in the 1940s, there was a war called World War II, and many individuals fought in that war, and then they were able to receive what's called the GI Bill, right? Many of you have heard of this GI Bill. It helped a lot of people, a lot of veterans buy houses, amongst other things. Except for the 1.4 million Black men who served, who were denied the GI Bill and not allowed to receive the GI Bill. So for anybody who came from a white family, some Latin families, depending on skin complexion and how they were rated in the system, and other families, they were able to buy a home. And many individuals since the 1940s were able to attain a college degree, their own home, their own cars, other things, because that home that the government purchased for a lot of soldiers, 12 million-ish soldiers in America, through the GI Bill, allowed them to use that for down payment, for collateral, for other things, right? Well, the 1.4 million Black men who served were not provided that support. So this is when we talk about generations. Now, some families were provided handouts from the government as a result of their service, right? So it's a benefit. It wouldn't be a handout except that they denied other citizens who were doing the exact same thing. So some got a handout and some got a hand put on the top of their heads from being able to come up above water. And so those families now generationally past don't have equity that's being building and accelerating. Other families have multiple individuals within multiple generations who are able to advance, because some people got payment from the government and others didn't for the exact same service. And the only reason some didn't was because of the color of their skin, which is kind of like reparations, except that they're not really repairing anything. You're just compensating some and not others. Emily Brown here asked about how are your services helping qualifying Lancastrians who maybe don't speak English or Spanish? So this is a really important question. A lot of times when we talk about language access, it's English and then Spanish. What are your organizations doing to think beyond and broader than the English and Spanish language accessibility? And anyone can hop in here as needed.
Well, here at Lancaster Works, we partner. I got to tell you, I'm a true believer in collective impact partnerships. And we work with organizations like Church World Services, who have the interpretation services they provide to assist us in communicating more fully with that population. And we work really closely with them to help the refugee and immigrant population find employment opportunities and to overcome that barrier.
Yeah, Kevin, one of the things we do is we leverage technology. I mean, technology has really come a long way in language translation, if need be, and the conversation is going to be of more complex nature. You know, obviously we would contract with interpretation services, but really, you know, technology has been huge. We've been able to use things like Google Translate to talk to many number of different languages and at least get an idea of what that conversation sounds like. It may not be perfect, but it's definitely something that is a cheap resource for businesses to utilize.
Yeah, we've used that technology as well at VITA. We do have a site that works specifically with the Latino population. We also have a site that we work with the Keystone Deaf and Hard of Hearing, so we are able to provide services to those individuals. And this year, we also had a unique situation where we had an organization contact us wanting us to do some education for Afghani refugees that are here in Lancaster County. And so we were able to, one of my site coordinators was able to go over, do a short presentation, and then we were able to work out where some of our volunteers went to their site for 2 days, and they had translators there for us. And so we were able to do about 25 returns for individuals in the Afghan community.
You know, I'll second a little bit of everything that was spoken. We do a little bit of that at Assets, but I'll say we still have a long way to go. We have had the privilege of having a lot of immigrant and refugee individuals come through our programs, and while we were able to serve them, we could have done a lot better in making sure that not only language access, but something, the next layer on top of that, I think, is a little bit of cultural humility as well when it comes to working with diverse populations. We started this conversation off with credit, but even understanding that there are some cultures that maybe there isn't a credit system back home, or you know, they are adverse to debt or taking on debt. And what does that mean being in an American system now, where from a job to a place to live to starting a business all requires that. I think not only Assets, but I think there's this spectrum of where we could do so much more to make sure that, especially in Lancaster County, that we consider ourselves at least in Lancaster City, a certified welcoming city. But we want to make sure that we're going beyond language access, but even thinking about cultural humility among the DNA of all of our resources.
Yeah, thanks. So we at 2-on-1 here at United Way, we use language. Well, we have a number of staff, we're multilingual, but then we use Language Line, which is extremely expensive and just does the translation, right? It doesn't do that cultural humility element that Jamie, you just talked about. One of the things that we also did, I know we worked with the city on this, is we funded some work for language access 2 years ago for 5 different organizations and translated beyond just English and Spanish into even some languages that have a different visual script, right? So those are languages which is just beyond the verbal oral, but also into the readability. And so that's something that we had worked with on a variety of organizations. And the partner that we worked with, just in case any organization would be interested in doing this directly, is Amer's Communication Essentials. And it's a fantastic organization to work with. And so hopefully many of you have worked with him and he's able to connect you. And then Church World Service also does some of this work on the individual level. I know my dad just 2 weeks ago translated for Swahili, for some Swahili speakers, did some translation there that he was capable of doing. And, part of the challenge is how do you figure out the difference between certified translation and then sort of common translation, right? So like oftentimes what happens in communities is your kids do the translation because they go to school and they speak English and you don't because you moved here later in life. Well, you shouldn't be taking that kid to your medical appointment, right? I mean, imagine your kid having to tell you that you have some type of terminal cancer or something, and it's like an 8-year-old kid, right? So it's important that our organizations, because sometimes we do this like, oh, you have someone who can translate, great, let's bring them in. It's really important for organizations to understand the significance of what you're asking individuals to then bear the burden of, and it's really not right. And so we need to be better, as Jamie said, we're just not there. I love all of what we're doing, we're just not there. Angel, did you have something else on this topic, or did you want to hop on?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, the language barriers are one thing, but also where I know Community First Fund lacks, and maybe other organizations, is that the actual documentation, like getting legal documents in different languages and helping people understand what they're signing and what they're doing. I mean, it's very hard for me to recall an organization that has, other languages besides Spanish. And, that's also a big problem. I don't have the answer for it, but it's something that, Community First Fund is aware of. Again, we don't have an answer for it too, but it's something that's, really important and really needed with the different cultures we have in Lancaster County.
I will say this is a great opportunity to think about Tyrone's space, right? So when you hire people, here's a question for not just the panelists. This is rhetorical, but it's for everyone who's paying attention. When you hire someone and they speak another language than English, and you allow them or encourage them to use that language to the benefit of your organization, are you paying them more money for that? Because you should. Because you pay people more money because they have a college degree. If they're fluent in another language, you should be thinking about that as a skill additive to their ability to perform. And so that's something that if we start to do, then when Tyrone is going out and recruiting individuals to work in an environment, he can say, oh, you speak Amharic? There's an Ethiopian population here in Lancaster. Let me add that when I go and talk to this business that's got a plant floor and safety issues and a lot of immigrant refugees who happen to come from Ethiopia. And all of a sudden, now that person goes from being a barriered individual to one who has unique and extra skill sets to help them advance their economic opportunities in this country. And so I think that's something to make sure that you think about when you're thinking about how you're valuing a person, is the intangibles that we all value in other ways. Language ability is one for you to improve who you can actually serve in your organization, nonprofit or for-profit. This is not a nonprofit only thing, right? This is the ability to sell more of your products if you're a for-profit happens when you actually diversify your workforce. Angel, there's a question here, and I'm going to kick it to you, and I'm glad as a board chair for a credit union to also answer this a little bit. And Jamie, you might be able to tackle this on a slightly different angle as well. But so someone mentioned once to me that a mortgage from a credit union wouldn't be seen as competitive for clients who are first-time home buyers. But I think credit unions are great to partner with because they might have better loan products for first-time buyers, folks this webinar is focusing on and would love to utilize. What would you say to this person's claim, Angel?
Well, I would say, just like banks, credit unions have different credit standards and also different missions. One of the Community First Fund's missions is that to provide capital to everyone, in the lowest cost possible. So the one way we do that in the credit union side is by offering, personal loans, home equity loans, things of that nature at, very competitive rates, very reasonable underwriting standards in the sense of larger credit ranges, higher loan to values on home equities or vehicles. Whereas, banks lend in a pretty stringent box because they have shareholders to please. We can look at that box and really bend that box a great deal. In Philadelphia, and we don't have this product yet everywhere, but in Philadelphia, we do mortgages for individuals with ITINs. These are really hardworking individuals that could not get a traditional mortgage. They can't prove their income in traditional ways. So we work with them to really, figure out a way to prove their income by bank statements and checks they get and things of that nature, and help them buy their first home. And these people are so grateful. I mean, I think this year we've probably done, 25 to 30 mortgages for people with ITINs in Philadelphia. So it's pretty incredible. And that's a product that we're looking to expand, obviously, in other counties, but that's a big undertaking. So I would say to that person is, research obviously is key, right? Not all credit unions are created equally, to make sure they talk to a banker, talk to somebody. And, hopefully they get that right person that will take the time to not look at them as just another widget or another sale, and really understand their needs. But I would say it's that individual research is key, and really making phone calls and taking time to ask things about, hey, what's your credit standards? What do you need there? Or what kind of down payment can I use to buy a vehicle? Things of that nature. And they'll be able to find a credit union or a bank that works for them.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just add a little bit of framing for understanding the different forms of banking. So you have really large banks, places like Wells Fargo, that frequently every couple of years or almost every year end up paying billions of dollars in fines for bad business practices around starting fake accounts and stuff like that, right? They are driven by it being a Fortune 500 company, and they have a necessity to deliver certain results that pushes all the way down. And so you get pushy salespeople and some of that kind of thing. Then you've got smaller regional banks like Fulton, and community banks that are even sort of smaller than that. And you have those in Lancaster. Fulton is going to operate very differently than Bank of America or Wells Fargo. And so each bank, to Angel's point, do your research. Each bank is going to bring different sort of elements to it. Then there's credit unions. Credit unions are slightly different because they're member owned. So this is a really important component. Banks are either privately owned, and so there's like a single or multiple individuals whose personal profit is the result of the bank performance. And then there's credit unions. Credit unions are wholly owned by the members. And so the people who are supposed to benefit, the shareholders of a credit union, are the members themselves. Just as one example of what's different in a mortgage, depending on rate or other things, in a bank, if you get a mortgage or you get a large commercial loan, you will have what's called a prepayment penalty. A prepayment penalty says if you pay it off earlier, you get a lot of money, you change your economic circumstances, you pay it off earlier, you'll be penalized with a prepayment penalty, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5% of that. This is a little bit different in commercial lending. It happens on both sides, but in private personal finance, credit unions are legally not allowed to charge you a prepayment penalty, because a credit union, by its own legal restrictions from the NCUA, their accrediting body, is not allowed to punish their own members, particularly not for good behavior. And so you have a variety of different means. Credit unions are also more flexible. They also can be more restricted because they have to have a certain affinity. Everend's credit union that I'm a board chair of was started by a faith-based entity, and so there's a component there. We do have non-faith-based individuals, but there's certain agreements within that structure. It's just how it's structured. Community First Fund has a geographical charter, so you have to be in a certain geographical area. So those credit unions bring a lot of value, and they are not all created equal. Like Angel said, I won't name some who have a different sort of model, but some try to be more like banks and others try to be more like community institutions. So you want to do your research there, whatever financial partner you do choose to work with. But it's really important to walk in there and have a conversation. The relationship in a banking relationship should be personal. You should know who you're working with, and it should be the same person again and again. If you're getting passed around every time you walk in, not to the teller, but when you have that relationship with your lender, if you're getting passed around and you're just another number, you should find a different financial institution.
Kevin, if I may,
Please do.
only other one I would add is community development financial institutions. So we threw the term CDFI around there, which Community First Fund and Assets were both are. And those are opportunities. Typically, we are a true nonprofit. So a lot of our services are really focused on impacting the community, serving low-income individuals and folks that don't have access to traditional capital. So just another tool in the toolbox that not too many people are aware exist, and they are specifically, at least the ones in our community for here. And I know Tenfold is also in the process of becoming a certified CDFI, where they would focus on housing. Community First Fund and Assets focus on small business development. So just wanted to throw that one out there as another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, no, thanks. And we don't have a CDFI that's really focused on personal finances in Lancaster right now, but CDFIs are a wide range of different organizational structures. Here, as Jamie mentioned, we have 2 CDFIs that they're focused on small business lending, and Tenfold in the past have been a CDFI and is recertifying, and they are focused on housing. So those are some opportunities for you in a financial element there to be thinking about. And then we all work together, right? Like, so we're gonna push you over there where it makes sense. And at Vita, we work with banks and credit unions to help you get a bank account. And there's just a variety of sort of collegial work here. There's a question here about domestic violence, and I'm not sure if any of you interface directly in this space, but you know, domestic violence has a real tight relationship with economic challenges. How do you all work with survivors of domestic violence? And then the other part, maybe this one for sure, all of you could answer in some way, is the sort of idea of trauma-informed work. How does trauma-informed work show up in the spaces that you may be working at, but also anything for domestic violence partners particularly?
So we're here at Tenfold. I know recently, one of our success stories hinged around a survivor of domestic violence. We had given a small education series over at one of the domestic violence shelters on budget and credit and savings. During all of that, this person had come to us. We were able to help her start with a financial plan. She worked through our Match Savings for Tomorrow program and now owns her own home. So, you know, I think all of us would do our best to be vigilant about making sure that we met with that person at whatever level they needed to either make sure that there was no confidentiality issues or things of that nature. I think most of us have the ability to work remotely to some degree, that whatever we can do to make sure that they remained safe and secure, and following that trauma-informed pathway to helping them reduce whatever barriers there are to help them become mobile and lead their way through whatever goal it is that they have.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was gonna say, so trauma obviously has been a big buzzword over the last like 5 to 10 years. You know, the science of trauma has obviously expanded a lot. And as you know, living in poverty is a great trauma. And people who live in poverty obviously are subjected to many things, domestic abuse being one of them, for many different reasons. As someone who grew up in poverty with a domestic abuse situation, you know, it's one of those things that it really doesn't come up in small business lending conversations. But like Jamie mentioned, that cultural humility is understanding people's story, where they come from, can really help you coach them and give the technical assistance and deliver it in the right way where they're receptive to it and they want to make those changes to get that economic mobility. You know, trauma is far reaching. It lasts a very, very long time. And a lot of times it's not addressed. So it seeps into personal relationships, working relationships. It seeps into financial habits, mental health habits, and also, you know, physical well-being habits. So it's one of those things that if in the event somebody, you know, does communicate a domestic abuse situation, you know, obviously at Here Community First Fund, we're very sensitive to those issues. And that is something that I would, with the permission of the client, bring up in any request that's needed, because it could have an impact on their credit. It can have an impact on where they live. But again, this is where you get the story and you understand that if you didn't grow up in trauma, it's hard to understand that sometimes, but there's so much research out there right now that trauma is a real problem, and especially people who live in poverty.
Yeah, for those of you who are watching this live, I just dropped in the chat the CDC's website around adverse childhood experiences the ACEs work, ACEs score, which is sort of the fundamental underpinning of a lot of the conversations that we have around trauma informed. So feel free to check that out. For those of you watching the recording, you can just Google adverse childhood experiences, and you can learn a lot about how trauma starts at a young age. Most of us, even those of you who grew up in a stable, wealthy family, probably have one or two elements of an ACEs score, right? Anyone who maybe had a family member go to prison or other things that don't connect in the same ways as we think of sort of trauma as like a direct abuse, but has an impact. And so there's a wide variety of things in work that are there. Thank you for that question. It's an important one, and it's a difficult one, and it's one that we need to think about. How do we continually address? There are great resources for organizations who are interested in trauma-informed work. You can start at LG. They do some great work that Melanie Snyder started over there to provide some training for trauma-informed work. I want to look over here to Kim. Amr posted here the claim that out there that, quote, VITA does not get me as high of a return as the tax preparer down the road. Help me respond to this comment, please, and thank you.
All of the volunteers through VITA are community members. They volunteer their time. This past year, our volunteers, it was over 15,000 hours of time that they volunteered to complete returns this year. I do know there have been a number of instances where we've had that said to us, and we will, as best we can, we'll be able to look at returns from previous years for the individual if they have them. We have a high level of professionalism and ethics, and we're not going to do anything that that is questionable. We've looked at returns in the past, and we've seen situations. We actually had a situation last summer where a family came in. They had their returns for a couple of years. They needed to do their 2021 taxes. We were looking through it, and the tax preparer before had used the wife as a dependent instead of the spouse. And situations like that, they were here from Mexico. All their kids were born here in the United States, but mom still did not have a residency. And it was causing quite a bit of trauma, thinking that she could potentially be asked to leave the country because of the way that they did their taxes. So we try to find every single rebate, every single credit that we're able to. So we have a 12-hour training that all of our taxpayers go through every year to find all of those incentives and credits and things that we're able to pass on to the client. We can do income taxes for free, but sometimes we still have folks that they think, they didn't like what our answer was. I mean, this year there were a lot of changes in the tax law, and they didn't understand why they didn't get as much money this year as they did last year. And they're like, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. And they do end up spending the money, or sometimes they will come back after they realize how much it's going to be. But we do follow all of the guidelines. We, like I mentioned, our volunteers are IRS certified. So we have all the information, and we do our best to get all that we can for our clients.
Thanks, Kim. Just because it is one of our programs, I can add that the IRS certification is a requirement at different levels, all the way up through advanced and even military certification. In some cases, that's really important to understand that this, while they're volunteers, they're not just like a do-gooder who's I kind of know taxes. No, these are trained individuals. No one pays for the tax prep. On average, that's going to save you about $250+. So right out of the gate, you have that. The other thing is that Kim mentioned this. The tax prep space has a lot of really predatory people who can find individuals, particularly around language and culture and other things, who don't understand this space, and they can just tell the government, the IRS, that they have a whole bunch of credits that they actually aren't qualified for. And then when the proverbial whatever hits the whatever, what ends up happening is they get audited, they get the punishment, they get all the challenges. But the tax companies that do this know that they're playing the averages more often than not. That's not going to happen. And so they don't worry as much about the individual instance where that happens. So Amr, for that, I would just let people know that they are all IRS certified. The tax preparation is free. So right out of the gate, you've got that. The other thing that people sometimes don't understand is that people go and they file for their taxes and they're handed their money right then. So they feel like they got all their money and they got it back. And they don't realize that those companies are taking anywhere up to 400%, 300% of what that return would be, in interest, and they're keeping that until the tax return comes back. So there's a variety of things there, but thanks for that question. There's another question here I'd like for us to think about, because I know that this one plays across a lot of lines. Maybe Tyrone, I don't know if you have any sort of conversation around this, but people with individual disability and developmental disabilities, right? Many of these individuals rely on public assistance. This is a second question. Angel had answered one question just a few minutes ago in the back end there about sort of cliff effect and benefits. Okay, so I have public assistance. And for those of you who don't know the term cliff effect is what happens when you receive public assistance, Medicaid or other cash assistance, or which is very rare to get cash assistance, but other assistance that you receive because your income is below a certain threshold, right? The problem is it doesn't taper off. It's you make a certain amount of resources, and for people with intellectual and physical disabilities, this may be their medical bills are significant. You go and all of a sudden you make, and I am not exaggerating, 1 penny more than the threshold, all of the benefits of that category go to zero. And so people can all of a sudden be like, hey, I made an extra $1 an hour, and now all of a sudden I lost $30,000 in medical benefits, right? That's not a good trade. And so Tyrone, I don't know how if this plays in when you're thinking about where are different avenues like for people to get jobs that are aware of some of those challenges. Randy, I know you were part of a pilot that we did here at United Way, building a benefit cliff calculator that you looked at and Cap had looked at. So Randy or Tyrone, I don't know if either one of you want to hop in there and thinking about that.
Yeah, it was United Way has provided a very useful tool that could help somebody look at the benefits of both scenarios and take it from a realistic standpoint. And okay, if my income increases to this amount, what can I possibly now have to live without? And you can take the calculation from that and determine whether or not this is the best move or how that will impact your life moving forward. It could be the loss of food security. It could be the loss of childcare situations. And so if you ultimately lose your childcare or have to pay for it out of your pocket, how much money did you actually benefit by the increase in your income? And I think these are important decisions that people have to make before they jump into something. And so this calculator can give you that ability to make that financial assessment reasonably and honorably.
Emily, the benefit calculator is right now, because it's in developmental spaces, we've been working with organizations to pilot to use. We're exploring what it would be like to hand it to individuals to use. But at this point, we just wrapped the pilot with Tenfold and with CAP, and we're doing the following analysis afterwards to try to figure out what's the next step. Does it make sense to hand it to people directly? Do they need that navigation? So stay tuned for that. Just because it's 11:12, I'm going to make sure we remember to do this. All my panelists here, if you can make sure you put in whatever contact information you want, whether that's an info at or your personal contact in the chat, and your organizational links, make sure you select Angel. You just dropped one to me, but make sure it goes to everyone there, not just hosts and panelists, everyone there. So we want to make sure that we get you all that information, and then Olivia will put that out in the email afterwards as well. So first of all, just thanks. This has been a great conversation. And this may be my last one before I leave United Way. So glad that this has been such a fantastic conversation here this morning. So when we think about the variety of spaces that you all are in and you all are advancing, I'm going to ask this question a little different than I usually do. what motivates you? Like, why are you choosing to be in this space personally, not professionally, opportunity, like personally? You wake up in the morning, you know you're doing something good, which is like the dream that we all have for, you know, beyond the compensation. You know, why are you in this space? What is it that keeps you going? It's not easy, I'm sure, to constantly have to battle with the structural challenges, the individual challenges, all those barriers for you to accomplish what you want for everyone. But why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you continuing to be here?
I'll go first. I'm excited about this. So at the end of his presentation, he had 2 words there about serving people. And I think for me, that's what it's all about. I came from a mental health background. We were able to work with those individuals, and moving into this position, it has been amazing. I have lots and lots of stories in that. I love the ability that I'm able to work face to face with these individuals that come to me for help because of the fear, because of the anxiety of when you say IRS, everybody, you know, your blood run cold. But, you know, we're giving that hope. We're giving them. We have individuals who, as I mentioned before, are trained and they know their stuff. But when I have someone walk out of the office, we helped him with a return. He ended up getting a significant amount of money back. And then he came to me and he was like, oh, I forgot I have this document. So when we added that to his return, he ended up owing over $9,000. But this gentleman, when he walked out of the office, he was so appreciative that we were able to help him to deal with his return. He had to give me a hug, and he was just, you know, thank you so much. You know, I really appreciate this. So part of why I do it is to be able to serve people, to be able to help those individuals, to be able to get them back almost $9 million in income tax returns, to save them almost $2.5 million in fees. So I'm there to help folks become more mobile.
I'd say all of our individual stories drove us to this work. You know, I know myself, in my case, you know, I look at my family's evolution from, you talk about economic mobility. My grandfather was probably the most notorious gangster in Trenton, New Jersey. And Jamie still calls me Tyrone from Trenton, as a matter of fact. But, you know, we evolved from him doing what he did to my mother, who worked 50 years for the state, enabled me to get a college education, become an entrepreneur. And we have 4 amazing children in my household that are just doing incredible things with their lives. And I look at that, I know I've been blessed and with that. You know, I want to be able to give back to others the same way that it was given to me.
Yeah, Kevin, I'll jump in there. Yeah, so most of my career I was in banking, and you know, I got to a turning point where I got tired helping people who already had a ton of resources and already had a ton of options. And you know, when I was presented to work with a CDFI, Community First Fund, just the appreciativeness and caring for people and educating people, which is a big passion of mine, you know, helping people open a business, giving people hope and helping them realize a dream that they never thought would be possible. You know, that's really what drives me in the morning. I absolutely love my job. I love just seeing people's faces when they achieve something. And you know, just a quick story. You know, I had a customer who, you know, we've helped with financing, and years ago we helped them buy a building, you know, for a couple of $100,000, and now that building is worth, you know, $1.5 million, right? So that's an example of, you know, just if we weren't there, who knows if that would have ever happened for that person. You know what I mean? A minority individual who has a family and now has a lot of wealth, and when they retire, they'll be very, very comfortable. But yeah, that's why I get up every morning. It's just to do that good work. And you know, I have a lot of pride walking through the city and knowing that I had a hand in all these little businesses and people's economic mobility.
I've been doing the work for over 20 years, and one thing I learned early on is uh, there is no session that is alike from the next one. Every story is different, and those stories are so impactful, and they're their own little puzzle, their own little challenges, their own dramatic rescue story, or even, but most of the time they come up with, each individual is able to come up with the pathway for themselves. And watching that transformation and that story unfold is it's just inspiring, and helps keep people motivated to move forward. And so so those individuals, and I wish we could tell more stories. I know a lot of people are very private, especially when it comes to finances, but we get to see them on a daily basis.
Yeah, honestly, it's the responsibility to pay it forward. So similar to what Tyrone said around our personal stories, my family came here from Puerto Rico because of economic opportunity. My dad's, in a few years, he'll retire from High Steel, which is one of the first jobs he received that was able to provide for our family. And, when I think about the resources that our family received in order to achieve economic mobility. I learned how to ride my bike in Garden Court in the Southeast, right? I spent my childhood there. I was a Head Start kid at CAP, which we didn't talk about much about childcare in this conversation, which is also another huge part for economic mobility. But that played a huge part. And my parents bought their first home with the help of LHOP, now Tenfold, but back with LHOP with some down payment assistance for, I think it was either $50,000 or $59,000. I can't remember exactly what the house cost. But for 20 plus years, my dad worked day in and day out to, improve on the home, build equity. And, I got to see it firsthand, which allowed me to be a first generation college graduate for my family. So I get to experience this. And similar to Angel, my background was in banking. I wanted a career where, I thought I was going to be this professional in a fancy office and wear a suit and tie every day. I never want to wear a tie again in my life. Sorry, Tyrone. But but it was really the idea of like, hold on, as I develop the skill set, there's got to be a better way to go back to my community and use this skill set for good. And I think, I'm blessed every day to have that opportunity to be here at Assets and in other capacities to pay it forward and hopefully create that economic opportunity for others to do the same for their families.
Well, thank you all. I guess for me, I'll just mention a little bit. When I was on the board of Assets, when I joined the board, we were looking at taking our one program and trying to find someone to merge and shut it down. The organization was sort of struggling at that moment. Jess King had just come on as the executive director, and she asked me to join the board. And I said, we can't just sign up and shut down. And so I asked if I could help to work with some community members to do some fundraising. And we did. And we were able to have 3 fundraisers that summer and net out about $20,000. And it was just enough to keep the organization going. I'm not involved anymore, but they're doing amazing work. And to be able to know the ripple effect of what you do. The other day I was at the 10-year anniversary for Steepleview Lofts down on Prince Street or Water Street. There, the Landis owned property, and Melissa Watcher was there, and she came up to me, and she owns On Orange, if you've ever been to that restaurant. And we had a conversation. She reminded me I underwrote the loan for On Orange when she was trying to buy that space in 2008 over at Community First Fund, right? And here, Angel's here, and they're now a credit union, and they're doing so much. And so you're able to look at your little pebble into the water and see how it can. That was actually the theme of Community First Fund that year when I was there, the ripple effect, right? For me, it's not about the sort of big things. I mean, I fortunately have been had wonderful opportunities professionally, and so getting a newspaper for things, but I'm reminded that it's not the work that I'm doing, it's the work that my team is doing. I'm a figurehead in many ways, but I think about Kim and her transformation of where VITA is going, and it's great that we were able to hire her and bring her on, and I was part of that decision. And what she's going to do for VITA is going to be transformative to the entire community. They did 8,500 tax returns. There's 85 1,000 households that are eligible for VITA services. And so we've got to get that information out there, get those volunteers and those partnerships to come in. But the work that will happen, my small brief period of time didn't create any of that, but it did help move the stone to build the wall. And so it's just great to think about this space and this work as being a small part of a long and a large trajectory. And I've always been so grateful for the opportunity that, you know, in 10, 20 years, when my daughters are looking for jobs, to be able to say, you know, hey, this is what I did in my life. And it was part of this larger thing. Thank you for those opportunities, community, you know, to allow us to be able to serve you. I think all of us here. I'm just really just always grateful to be able to wake up every day and know that the work that I do as a flawed human being works with other people's efforts, and together we build a better community and a better space than any of us would be able to do on our own by ourselves. And so thank you, all of you who participate in the work that we do, whether you're volunteers, whether you're donors. Oh, right, that reminds me, you can donate to pretty much all these organizations here. So if you heard something that you really enjoyed or you liked, think about whether or not you want to open a bank account at Community First Fund. Make sure you refer someone who's looking for a job to Tyrone. I did recently. We have one house that we have a tenant, and the individual was having some challenges. An individual who's lived in the United States for 15 years from the Sudan, and was having some challenges at his employer, and so provided him Tyrone as a resource. You know, if you know a young individual or some family who's looking for their first time home, you know, Randy's organization is going to help give you money to put a down payment once you've had some coursework to help you better understand how to advance yourself economically. You know, helping people get that match savings account. And, you know, Jamie's work over there at Assets is allowing for whole families to structurally change their opportunities into the future. I know so many businesses from Assets, and support businesses that Assets helps to start. Make sure that you go and you say, hey, you know what, this is a person who's trying to do this thing. And where are we going out to eat this weekend? Or where are we going to get our haircut? You know, where are we going to do whatever, you know. For a long time, my house that we rented, we required the tenants to buy their fuel, or to at least look at Manor Fuels first. They could buy it from elsewhere, but they had to at least quote across it. Why? Because Manor Fuels was an Assets client. Think about the decisions that you're making. If you're doing fine economically, then for you, the opportunity is to build the world that others can thrive in. And that happens with the decisions that you make, where you expend your money, whether that's through donations, whether that's through your economic purchases, or the other ways that you involve yourself in our community. You have a massive amount of power. Just like each of us here on this call are taking our time and our workforce to be able to move that pebble, right? You every day make decisions that move the pebble. And together we build the road in which we will be able to prosper into the future, traveling together side by side, working in cohort with one another, and making sure that we leave no one behind. And so thank you all for your time, panelists. Thank you all for your time, community. And those of you who are catching the video later, we're sorry we missed you live, but we're thankful for everything that you do in our community as well. So without any further time, I will just say, thank you, panelists. We will continue to do the work as we move forward.